Hey fellow babies, welcome back to the Pachter Factor on SIFTD.net. We are hopeful you're watching this on SIFTD and you are a Patreon patron and appreciate your patronage. If you are watching it a week late on YouTube because you choose not to support Shane and his fine efforts on SIFTD.net, we understand, but the price of admission then is you must follow me on Twitter. Our first question from Patreon from Brandon DeGroot. I actually used to work with Jim DeGroot. Is that your dad, Brandon? It could be. You never know. According to rumors, an unnamed PlayStation source, rumors unnamed, I love that, claimed, a claim, God of War's pre-order numbers are soft. Wow. Does the lack of a concrete release date for an extended period of time hurt pre-orders? Are pre-orders becoming a thing of the past? Are digital sales affecting them? Thanks. Okay. I mean, you kind of answered your own question. What kind of moron pre-orders a game? I mean, so the answer to that question is you have to be a complete idiot to pre-order anything anymore that's offered digitally, unless you are bribed to do so. So if the publisher says to you, pre-order God of War and we'll give you, Sub-Zero as a playable character in your God of War or something. So if they were to give you something cool for pre-ordering, I kind of get it. Or if you get a cool movie poster, game poster or something, or you get a cool mouse pad, that's got Kratos' face on it, fine. But short of getting something for free for your pre-order, what the hell would you pre-order for? And the answer is that, back in the day, and I'd say early 2000s, you might worry that your local GameStop wouldn't buy enough copies of, the new Madden or the new Call of Duty or, the new God of War, and that they might run out. And so if you went to the store the day after launch to buy it, they might not have it. And then you'd have to wait a week to get it. But with digital downloads, you know what the inventory for digital is? It's infinite. It doesn't matter. It's the same file that they're copying and downloading every time somebody buys it. So they never run out. And I'll give you kind of an analogy, and anybody that's under 20 probably doesn't even know what I'm talking about. But about, 15 years ago, no, a little less, 10 years ago, movies were shown in the theater on film. And so the movie theaters got film canisters, and they call those a print. And so in order to show you a movie in a theater, the movie exhibitor, the movie theater owner, had to get that can of film delivered to the theater and put on a reel and have a projectionist play the movie. And those prints were thousands of dollars. I think each one was a couple $1,000. And so the studio had these big fees, these big costs to print all the film. It cost a lot of money. And obviously they were worried about the copies getting out, so there was security and stuff. And so when you would go to the theater to see a movie, like when I went to see the new Star Wars, people stood in line for hours because only a limited number of theaters got those prints. And so you would go to the theater complex and that movie wasn't playing on 8 screens or 10 screens. About 10 years ago, there was a migration to digital distribution of film. And so now films are located on servers inside the exhibitor, inside the theater. And they can feed that film to 10 screens if they want. So guess what? Movies aren't sold out anymore. I mean, that particular showing might be sold out, but if there's demand for a Star Wars on opening weekend, they will put it on as many screens as they can put it on. And so it ends up satisfying demand. So we don't have lines of sellouts anymore. Back when I was a kid, you would actually come home for going out to the movies and you didn't see the movie because you couldn't get in. Doesn't happen anymore. Same with digital downloads of games. No retailer runs out of digital copies, ever. So you're a moron if you pre-order. So let me answer your question. Who cares what pre-order numbers are? Pre-order numbers are an indicator, not the only one, of interest in the game. If there is not a bribe offered, they're going to be small. If you have a game that's not dated yet, then you're not going to get many pre-orders. And if they're not offering promotional, reasons to buy the game, you're not going to pre-order. So pre-orders are largely irrelevant. And I would say, every time you hear a publisher talk about it, like pre-orders for this year's Call of Duty were the best ever, you're talking about 200,000, 500,000. You're not talking about 10 million pre-orders. And so who cares? GameStop told me back with, I think it was Spider-Man 2 in 2004 or something, that it was the most pre-ordered game in GameStop history at 50,000 units. Like, it just doesn't mean anything. So I don't understand why anybody talks about them. I don't think it makes any difference at all. There are plenty of games that come out that don't have big pre-orders and then get big review scores and they sell super well. And there are plenty of games, I'm sure, with big pre-orders that don't sell well. It just doesn't matter. So the answer is, the only people who care about pre-orders are the publishers who like to brag. But it's a meaningless statistic. I would pay no attention to it whatsoever. Our next question from SIFTD from Burko. Video game projects have flatlined on Kickstarter while tabletop board games are thriving. Why is this? That's a good question. Is there an appeal to owning something physical rather than digital? Is it because video games take too long to complete? I think it's probably a combination. More likely, it's just that there are fewer guys making independent video games that are susceptible, amenable to being funded on Kickstarter. Your Kickstarter number typically is $1 million, if you're lucky. I know that there are a couple of games. I think Brian Fargo got $3 million or something. Tim Schafer got like 6 or 5 or something. Occasionally you get games that get funded to a higher level, but they're still small games. I mean, a Lawbreakers, which wasn't a Kickstarter project, was probably $30 million to make or something. They're expensive to make. So you're not going to fund, a big game on Kickstarter. You're going to fund a small, intimate, fun game on Kickstarter. And I just think there are a limited number of really high quality developers who have interest in making those kind of games at that level of support. $3 million a game is not going to keep Tim Schafer's Double Fine Studios in business. He needs other revenue. And so I think that's it. And the tabletop board game stuff, what's it cost to make a tabletop board game? I mean, the answer is not very much. There's not, tons and tons and tons of graphic work and level design. And I mean, it's probably costs you $100 grand to make a board game. So I think that's the answer, that Kickstarter really works for small projects that are not particularly capital intensive or labor intensive. And it probably doesn't work for big capital intensive, labor intensive projects. So hardware tends to do really well on Kickstarter. Software is harder to pull off. I think it's really that simple. And so you asked it correctly at the end, is there an appeal to owning something physical rather than digital? The appeal is not to owning something physical, it's to making something physical. It just costs less than making something digital. And with a physical item, the design is what you fund with Kickstarter. Once you have more money than you need to design it and produce the first few, then the charge is just what it costs per item. So if it costs you to make this tabletop board game $5 to manufacture, the board game and the pieces and the boxing, packaging, you can charge 10 or 15 and make a profit, and then they will just sell them and they'll make more money. That doesn't work on software. The upfront cost is very expensive. And then, yes, video games take really a long time to complete. And so most Kickstarter supporters aren't patient enough to wait 2 or 3 years to get a game. Our next question from SIFTD, from Just Julio, or Just Julio. Yo, Pac-Man, with the factory full of facts. That's a lot of alliteration. Yeah, I'm the factory full of facts because I'm like really smart. Disney's purchase of 21st Century Fox seemed like a ludicrous idea to me because Fox seemed like the bigger company. How does one value a company's net worth? Just join SIFTD so I can ask you questions. Much love, brother. Much love back, Julio. No, Fox is not a bigger company. Disney's not proposing to buy all of Fox's assets. Fox is carving out a bunch of stuff like Fox News and Fox Business Channel, some of the TV stuff, so that that the family's gonna keep control of some of the TV. Disney was very interested in the television production capability. So the Fox television programming that you would watch, I don't even know if it's Fox, like Lethal Weapon, shows like that are on. I think Disney wanted that. I think Disney wanted to bring back into the fold a lot of the R-rated Marvel pictures. So movies like Deadpool and Logan were Fox productions, not Disney. I think Disney has made some really smart content acquisitions over the last 10 years. They bought Pixar, followed by Marvel, followed by Lucas. And, you've seen Marvel go from a movie every year to about 3. You've seen Star Wars go from a movie every decade to about to 1 a year. And Pixar has picked up the pace, but has been very, very successful. So Disney is really a good manager of content assets, and that's what they're going after. So no, not ludicrous at all. Fox is not bigger. Gosh, I can't remember now. I think the deal's like 53 billion, something like that. Yeah, Disney is a multiple of that. It's like 200 billion or something. I'd have to look it up, but it's a much bigger company than Fox. So no, it's something they can pull off. How do you value the net worth? Wow, that's a good question. Fox is a public company, so you can take the value of its shares, you can take the television assets they're going to keep, which essentially they're going to spin off to their shareholders. So if you look at the TV assets they're keeping, and I don't remember the numbers, but let's pretend it's 25% of the total. If you assume the total is worth, I'll make the math easy, $60 billion, because the share price was trading at 50 and you pay a 20% premium, and then you carve out 25% of that 60, 15, then you pay 45. They're paying like 53, so my math isn't perfect, but I'm just trying to give you a feel for how they value it. Pretty easy, and the question is just, do you get Fox shareholders to agree to the deal? Disney's paying a premium, so shareholders like selling at a profit, and if Disney's paying more than the stock's trading at, then shareholders accept that. So that's kind of it. I mean, you buy assets when you want to own them, and that's what EA is doing with Respawn. They like the studio, they like what they produce, they have an earnout to get make sure that those guys are productive, and they will be. They own the Titanfall brand now. They can keep more control of their Star Wars franchise. So yeah, you buy assets because they make sense. And as I said, Disney did that with Pixar, Marvel, and Lucas, and has exploited each of those pretty well. And AT&T's trying to buy Time Warner because they like those assets. I think they like the Warner Brothers studios. They like all the DC universe. They would own all that. Interestingly, you didn't ask this question, but I think it's interesting. There's 2 types of mergers. There's vertical mergers where one company that competes in an area buys another company that it competes directly with. So that would be like Exxon buying Mobil, which they did. They both were oil companies that had gasoline stations, and they did a vertical merger. There's I just said that backwards. That's horizontal, my bad. They do a horizontal merger, horizon. I got to remember my horizon versus my, is this vertical? Yeah, it is vertical. I always do that. Should I always do that? Yeah, sorry. Horizontal merger. When you're buying a competitor, that's a horizontal merger. That is what Disney and Fox is. They are both in the same business. One competitor is buying another competitor, and yet most observers think that'll go through. Then there's a merger where a supplier is purchased by the guy that they supply to. That's AT&T, because AT&T, in addition to being a telephone company, has a television distribution arm, which is Uverse. And so AT&T buying Time Warner, for some reason the Justice Department thinks that's illegal, so they block that. And they think that the horizontal merger, which is Disney buying competitor Fox, is legal. I find that baffling. Now, I don't think all horizontal mergers should be outlawed. Of course not. I mean, if you have 1% of the market and you buy another competitor with 1% of the market, who cares? So if you own a grocery chain that's only in a small market with 100 stores and you buy a chain with 5 stores, who cares, right? That's completely legit. So those are allowed. But if you're a television distribution company like Comcast was, they have cable, and they bought NBC Universal, that's exactly what AT&T and Time Warner are proposing. And so fascinating to me is that, typically Republican administrations are pro-business and Democratic administrations are not. but the Comcast NBC Universal merger was approved under the Obama administration, which was really counterintuitive. You would think that they would have opposed it. And the AT&T Time Warner merger is being opposed by the Trump administration, which is counterintuitive. So I'm not actually sure what's going on anymore. Like, I think there's more going on than normal law. Once again, fellow babies, thank you if you joined us on SIFTD.net. We appreciate your patronage on Patreon. If you're watching on YouTube, the only cost is to follow me on Twitter @MichaelPachter. And also, you know, I like to get questions on Twitter. If it's not in a window where we're asking for them on the show and you ask me something I think my followers would like to know about, I'll answer you on Twitter. I have no problem with that. So go ahead, follow me, ask questions. I have no problem. I think I opened up my DMs so you guys can direct message me if you want a private answer. I probably don't reply to DMs more than once a week, but I'm on Twitter pretty much every day. So looking forward to getting back that 100 follower loss that I incurred over the holidays. As everybody got their New Year's resolution not to follow Democrats. Sorry, but half the country is Democratic. I mean, we really are. So what are you going to do? Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next week. So that is a map of Scotland. And if you were to look at a map of of the United Kingdom, you'd see that England is below there. So that's Scotland. And what you got in Scotland is you got a portion, the bottom half of the country is called the Lowland. The top part of the country is called the Highland. Well, go figure. So Lowland and Highland. That corner of the Highlands is called Speyside. Then you've got all these little tiny islands out there. And then you've got this little place that is pronounced Islay. Go figure. Islay. Pronounced Islay. Not Islay or Islay. Islay. And then you have this little tiny place called Campbelltown. So I'm going to talk about Scotches briefly, but I'm going to focus on the ones that come from here. And that right there is Irish. That's Ireland. So just so you kind of get your bearings here. We're heading toward Ireland, okay? So why is Scotch so good? And why is it made in Scotland? The answer is that the Scots made whiskey just like everybody else. I mean, everybody figured out to take some grain and distill it into whiskey. And the Scots decided that, you know, they noticed, and I assume back in 1,000 years ago, they noticed that if they allowed some of their grains to just kind of ferment, they would turn into alcohol. And the sugar content in the grain is what turns into alcohol. And so they used what's called malted barley. So there's malt in the Scotch. Malt, like in malted milk, actually is a vegetable product. Barley, you know, if you ever eat your Campbell's, soup, alphabet soup, it's little white dots in there. That's barley. It's actually pretty tasty. It's a grain. And they fermented the barley. They turned it into whiskey. But what they would do is they would roast the barley, and they roasted it with the cheapest fuel source they could find. And so the more you get away from land, or the closer you get to the ocean, you have something in Scotland that grows naturally called peat. And it's just a moss that grows on kind of the sides of things. It's a natural growing, occurring vegetable. And they would harvest it, and it burns. So they use it for heat. So if they burned peat to roast the barley and to distill the whiskey, there was some flavor from the peat. Just like when you barbecue with real wood and you throw mesquite chips on the barbecue, you get that smoky flavor in your meat. So that's what happened to Scotch. So I've got some Scotches to show you from this area. The islands, one of the islands is called Orkney. And you can look all this stuff up, but Kirkwall apparently is an island in our town in Orkney Island. And its most famous whiskey is Highland Park. This stuff's really good. But what I will tell you about this stuff is it's mildly peaty. It's a very full flavored, good Scotch. Mildly peaty. What does peat taste like? It's smoky. A lot of people say the peatier, the more peaty the whiskey, the more it tastes like you poured it into an ashtray that someone just put a cigar out in. So this is a peaty Scotch. I like it. So I would say if you're going to start with peaty Scotches, start with this one because it's interesting. Okay, I'll give you another one though. This one, Laphroaig, this is from on the remote island of Islay on the west coast of Scotland. Islay is the little red dot. That little island has really good Scotch distillery distilleries. Laphroaig, this is just flat out smoky Scotch. Some people will say this burns. It's 10-year-old, which is not particularly expensive. This is probably about $30, $35. This is also about $35. I prefer this one, but you might like this. So if you want to try smoky Scotch, if you are a smoker, especially if you're a cigar smoker, this goes really well with cigars because the cigar smoke will actually destroy your palate and then you'll enjoy this. Again, I like it. According to their own marketing here, the most richly flavored of all Scotch whiskeys. Richly flavored means this is a peat bomb. This will explode, okay? Really good though. But if you want to spend about twice as much and graduate, you get to Lagavulin or Lagavulin. Islay again, 16 years old. What is the difference between 16 and 10? I'm going to do the math for you. 6. The difference is this matures in a barrel longer. So when you mature in wood, it takes away some of the harshness. This is smokier than the other two. Okay, this is the one I have heard described as it tastes like you poured your Scotch into an ashtray that had cigar, ashes in it. It does, but it's really good. It's just amazing how good this is. So what's interesting about this, and you probably can't read it very well, but that says established right there in glass, 1816. Laphroaig, 1815. That's when these distilleries started. That's how old they are. Okay, so these whiskeys are for people who like peat bombs. I would suggest, if you're just trying out Scotch and you haven't had them before, start with Highland Park. It's a different island. For whatever reason, the style there isn't as heavily peated as these are. These are heavily peated. And that just means they roast the barley longer with more peat and it just gets more flavor. Start with Highland Park. If you like it, I would graduate to Laphroaig. If it doesn't destroy your palate, this is the ultimate. But this costs about $70, maybe 65. Those are 35. So again, when you hear that, by the way, I know that a lot of people go, oh my God, 65 bucks, that's way too much money. A crappy bottle of wine is like 15 bucks. And there is more alcohol in this than in 5 crappy bottles of wine. So for real, if you drink, you're going to drink a half a bottle of wine. If you drink, if you open a bottle for dinner, you're not going to drink more than 1/10 of this bottle in a sitting. I mean, it's 2.5 ounces. That's plenty. 2.5 ounces is about a little more than half of this glass. That's plenty. You do not want to be drinking more than that in a sitting unless you're trying to get hammered. I probably drink about 4 ounces in a day. I mean, I don't OD. So I would not suggest you do it. So it ends up being about, like I said, $7.5, $10 a sitting. That's not crazy at all for that, for good whiskey. I'm having a Scotch dinner in March, and I picked my 12 favorite Scotches under $100. My average cost on all of them is under 70. It's like 65. So I have, and I'll go in the next episode, I'll go through a list of those. But my favorites, there are plenty that are in the 30s. So plenty of really inexpensive, good whiskeys. And again, you can drink Johnny Walker Red and pay 15 bucks a bottle for a blended, crappy 7-year-old Scotch. Or you can spend, 40 and drink a great Scotch. And since it's going to last you a long time, splurge.